All right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to my first channel. If you are watching this, thank you so much. So I decided to do a book review of this book because I have, been a casual consumer of some of the bad book reviews on YouTube for a while now, and seeing them kind of reminded me of this book that a friend recommended to me in high school, and it annoyed me so much I never finished reading it, but I thought it would be entertaining to revisit it and bring some of you along for the ride with me. So to start, this is called God-Shaped Hole by Tiffany DiBartolo. And fittingly, there is an endorsement from Colleen Hoover on the back, which I know is YouTube's favorite author. And she says, God-Shaped Hole will change you as a reader, writer, and human. It is rare books like this one that remind me of why I fell in love with the written word. So, if that gives you any indication of what this book is about to be, definitely toxic relationship, but my chief complaint is that the two main characters that you are supposed to root for, the star-crossed lovers, are just absolutely insufferable. It is a romance between our main girl Beatrice, who is the epitome of not like other girls, and Jacob Grace, who is a manic pixie dream boy. They both annoy the crap out of me, and the romance itself I think is quite boring, but the characters pissed me off so much that I decided to make this video. All right, so we start off with the inside cover goes, "When I was 12, a fortune teller told me that my one true love would die young and leave me all alone." So, I wonder if you can guess how the book ends. But yes, so the prelude to the book is a flashback to this time in young Beatrice's life, where her very rich Hollywood lawyer father drives her to a fancy club, and this fortune teller predicts for her that her one true love will die young in a tragic accident, and she also tells her that she has a very old soul and that she is close to reaching nirvana. We also find out on page 2, one of the main characterizations for our main character is that she has an incredibly delicate nose. And I wish that they did not bring this up so often in the book, because you really have to read about this girl's sense of smell way more often than is warranted. So anyway, then we jump forward to the instigation of the romance, which is when Beatrice reads a man-seeking woman entry in the LA Weekly, which goes, "If your intentions are pure, I'm seeking a friend for the end of the world." Which, pretentious drivel, but she eats it up. She loves it. She's like, "Oh my God, where have you been all my life?" Immediately reaches out and contacts him, and then he doesn't respond until 2 weeks later, but he calls her up. So he wants to meet immediately, and she goes, "He said all this as if he were in pain, as if I were the lost love he never got over. Or maybe that was the dreamer in me. I try to find meaning anywhere I can. It's the only way I know how to validate my existence." And I am not going to read every single passage that's like that in this book, but please just trust me that at least every other page we get a passage of pretentious drivel, just to let us know that Beatrice is so deep, so profound, and has such a unique way of viewing the world. She just sees everything on a deep level. So chapter 2, they meet at a restaurant. He is described as wearing a black ratty old wool coat that looked like it had been through a war and reminds Beatrice of a puppy from the pound. So, you know, dream boy right there. She is instantly horny. Before this man even says anything, we get a long, extensive paragraph about it, which I did not want to read, but I did anyway. And he immediately compliments her black hair, pale skin, and refined features. He says that her whole look gives her a certain uniqueness here among the acres of sun-kissed blondes, and that it gives her depth somehow to have a certain colored hair and pale skin. So she asks how many people respond, and Jacob says that 6 people responded, but he only met 5 out of the 6, and he decided not to meet these 6 because they were that wore too much makeup. Which, why did you include that? There was no purpose. Yeah. And trust me, that's not like the only unpleasant thing in this book. It just keeps coming, but that was the first real instance. All right, so they order coffee, sandwiches, and tell each other their life stories. We discover that Jacob is an only child to a single mother who grew up in Pasadena. His father abandoned him when he was young, and he hasn't had contact since. He dropped out of college after a year and got a short story published in Esquire, and he's just trying to write a book called Hallelujah. That's kind of his whole driver throughout this whole story. But he and Trixie bond over the fact that they both really hate their fathers, and Trixie hates her father because he was a cheat and left her mother a number of years ago, and she just really hasn't forgiven him or had a relationship with him since. So that's really their main commonality so far. We also find out that Trixie makes jewelry for a living. She is wildly successful, and that she has 4 things that she thinks make her life worth living, which is her job making jewelry, music, books, and sex. And trust me, she really, really likes sex. She thinks about it constantly. I have to read so many thoughts of this girl thinking about sex, thinking about Jacob. It's just a lot, and it's not in a sexy way. So they kiss goodbye, but then he immediately calls her that night. He tells Trixie that his ex is now a heroin addict and is a lesbian, and her reaction to hearing this sad, intimate story from him is that she's glad that his ex is a lesbian because that's one less woman to worry about. Which that's just disappointing. So she finds out that he also hates LA and he wants to move to the South. Trixie is impressed by that, but she's also shown to be incredibly wealthy, so I'm like, if you hate LA so much, why didn't you just leave? But they don't really go into that in depth at all. We also find out a cute little tidbit about Jacob, that when he was in high school, he met Charles Bukowski and formed some sort of relationship with him where they would drink together and bet on horses, and Bukowski gave him books, which is just this is just a random boy from Pasadena. I don't really think Charles Bukowski would have had much interest in a high schooler. But fun character development for Jacob. So, and then Jacob asks to come over and she says yes. And then when he gets to her house, he just creepily wanders around every room just staring at stuff. And I don't know about any of you out there, but if I invited someone over to my house for the first time and they took it upon themselves to wander around every room and stare at everything, I might find that a bit odd. But she's into it, obviously, and she already made him a necklace. They met earlier that day. But she gives him a necklace, etched it with the Japanese character for love. Then they go swimming in the ocean, go back to her apartment, and they have sex for the first time. She is incredibly relieved that he is circumcised, and we get this fun little excerpt. "Circumcised. Praise the Lord, I said to myself. I prefer the snipped penis. It would have been just my luck for the man of my dreams to have had an elephant trunk in his pants." Which, like, what? So that's fun. Then they go to sleep. When she wakes up in the morning, Jacob is gone. She is incredibly distraught. We have 2 lengthy pages about how upset she is, and then she forces herself to go back to sleep, and then she just wakes up and he's there. He went to the farmer's market. She wakes up and he's there. She describes him as looking like a painting of Jesus with the light of heaven shining down around him, my savior, which she met him yesterday. How is she this like head over heels goo goo gaga for this man? Very much insta-love, and there's not really any conflict for the beginning. They just immediately are completely in love with each other, which is kind of not my cup of tea in books. I know people like it. It is not my cup of tea. But anyway, she finds out he went to the farmer's market that morning. That's why he was gone. And after that, we get an incredibly weird excerpt following this. She goes, "I liked going to the farmer's market because it made me feel like I lived in a civilized society from another time. I'd pretend I was a little peasant girl wandering the countryside, bantering for the sweetest tomatoes and most fragrant basil. Sometimes I even wore a kerchief around my head for effect. I'd go with my best friend Katrina. She calls me Blanca because I'm so white. I call her Katrina because that's her name. She's a Russian Jew." Random paragraph, no relevance to the situation at all. I don't even know where to begin with the whole Blanca bit. Just a very odd writing choice, in my opinion. So yes, she gets violently upset because he left and didn't tell her. It's the second day they know each other. But she throws the peaches he got at the farmer's market across the room and starts crying, sobbing into his neck, saying she's like a Vermont maple with sap oozing from all of her glands and ducts. And she thinks to herself, "I wanted to tell him that I didn't usually act that way. Ordinarily, I wasn't such a girl, but Jacob had seemingly used his dick as a knife and pierced right through my armor." And this conflict is resolved by him going down on her. And then it's like it never even happened. So, cool. Then we get to chapter 7, which I like to call Sushi Night, which is when Beatrice meets Jacob's friends for the first time. And really the only 2 characters of relevance here are Pete, Jacob's best friend, and Pete's wife, Sarah. There is also a model at this outing, but she's there for seemingly no other reason than for Beatrice to comment on how vapid and annoying she is and how little she eats. Pete, Jacob's best friend, is my least favorite character in this whole book. He is described as having a pleasantly crass manner, which I don't think those two words really go together, but who am I to say? He speaks 12 decibels louder than anyone Beatrice knows and drank sake like it was water. So he basically drinks a lot and is very loud. They go to what Beatrice describes as a basement cum restaurant, which is a very interesting descriptor. Jacob and his friends order a bunch of seemingly gross sushi, and they play this weird game that they have created called Rochambeau. The group basically plays rock, paper, scissors against each other until only 2 players, the losers, remain. And these two play rock, paper, scissors, and the loser of each round selects, or the winner of each round selects a piece of sushi for the loser to eat until all the sushi is gone. So basically, they go to a restaurant and order a bunch of food and play a game that's very insulting to all the people that work there. And given how loud Pete is described, I doubt that this is going unnoticed by the staff, which, as someone who has worked in restaurants, I just feel like this is incredibly insulting, and why would you as an adult play this game? But anyway, we find out that Beatrice is somehow unable to play rock, paper, scissors. She has a nervous habit of getting confused during the count and always playing paper, which, as someone who in previous chapters we discovered was valedictorian of her high school class, I just feel like you shouldn't be confused by the very simple game of rock, paper, scissors, right? Like, children play that game. Anyway, Jacob and Pete are left, and they tortured each other, forcing one another to eat things I wouldn't feed to a dog if I had one. Jacob desperately tried to avoid the giant clam. It tastes like a foot that's been marinated in sewer water for a week, he said. And apparently they do this every week, which is just so uncharming. So after dinner, they go to this club called Hearts. Trixie basically tells the reader how in love with Jacob she is. She wants to be with him forever, even though she's only known him 2 days at this point. This book is basically the antithesis of a slow burn romance. But whatever. She also has a little bit more not like other girls internal monologue when Jacob goes to get a drink or whatever and a girl approaches him, and Trixie thinks to herself, she tossed her hair around when she laughed like the glamorous android slut monster I knew she was. Jacob would never give the time of day to a girl like her, I told myself. It's just every couple pages is something about women trashing women, almost as much as she thinks about how much she hates LA. It's exhausting. But anyway, after that, Jacob spends the next 5 nights at her place, and they end up going to a party for Katrina, who is the one that Beatrice described as the Russian Jew. Another mention that she calls her Blanca because her skin is the color of a cadaver. A lot of weird focus on Beatrice's skin, but we're not gonna dig too deep into that. She also says, as part of Katrina's introduction to the reader, that her father used to let his friends have sex with her when she was a kid. So she's not the most emotionally functional person she knows, but she has a good therapist. and I don't know why this is included. It's never brought up again. It's not relevant to the plot. I just feel like the author wanted to say something like shocking or tragic or comment on the ills of the world or something, which it just was included for no reason and out of left field, etc. They're going to a party for Katrina because she's opening a boutique. The reader somehow needs to know that Trixie is wearing, and Trixie is what Jacob started calling her, so Beatrice, Trixie, same person. She's wearing an $1,100 dress, which of course Kat convinced her to buy because she would never do that on her own because she's not materialistic. But she specifically describes the dress she's wearing as hot, but in a good way, not in the notice me please Mr. Hefner style that permeates the LA smog, trashing women and LA in the same sentence. Very Beatrice. She trashes an actress that she thinks is not a good actress for wearing one of her necklaces. She's very upset by this. But then we have like a weird bit of performative feminism that the author somehow added in, where Katrina says Tom Hanks' wife is here and tells Beatrice that she likes some of her jewelry, of course. And Beatrice goes, "Doesn't she have a name?" I said, thinking it highly unfair that the seemingly lovely woman who liked my ring was known only as someone's wife. Beatrice makes it very clear to the reader that she does not believe women who wear scantily clad clothes or care about their appearance are worth any sort of respect, but yet this passage goes out of the way to be like, no, Beatrice cares a lot about not reducing a woman to the role they play in a man's life, when she very clearly does not hold a lot of respect for women and groups. Any sort of person she views as vapid or caring about appearances into like not worthy of respect. Which is, the inclusion of this shows very clearly that the author did not understand the characterization she was giving Beatrice. Like, Beatrice is not a girl's girl. We'll just go with that. Anyway. Then the next chapter, they go eat at a Mexican restaurant. Beatrice refuses to eat because she thinks tacos make her hands smell like they've been shoved up someone's ass, which we already dissed Asian food. Why not diss Mexican food now too? But they have a discussion about their fears. Jacob is scared of sleeping another night without her. Oh my God, so romantic. Beatrice is scared of death. And they talk about their views on life and death. Jacob introduces to Trixie the concept of the God-shaped hole and tells her that life is about the search to fill the God-shaped hole that we all have inside of us. So deep. And then he asks her to move in together, and she says yes. And they have known each other for a week. So he moves into her apartment, which I know it's not the case, but considering this is only from Trixie's perspective, it would be so funny if he was literally just like so broke and just like totally took advantage of the fact that she was rich and like absolutely delulu in love with him and was like, you know what? I'm sick of paying rent, like I'm gonna get this girl to let me move in with her and all I have to do is like pretend to be in love with her. Like that would have been such a funny twist, which it's not what happened, but I think that would have been more funny. They move in together, they become obsessed with the idea of leaving LA, and they say that they're gonna do it as soon as Jacob finishes writing his book, which, you know, again, Beatrice has a shit ton of money. She makes jewelry, Jacob is a writer, they can literally do those jobs from anywhere. Why would they not just leave LA? Like, why are they making themselves stay so that Jacob can finish his book? Like, it says that Jacob says no because he wants to support himself. But he can write and sell his stories from anywhere. And like, LA is not a cheap cost of living place, so wouldn't it actually make more sense for them to move so that their cost of living is lower? It makes no sense to me. I know it's like symbolic or whatever, but it's just like, they seem dumb. But yeah, the next day, Trixie's mom shows up uninvited. She meets Jacob, loves him instantly. So she invites them to dinner. Jacob says yes, they'll go, and they go to dinner at Trixie's brother Chip's house. And her brother is a hotshot film producer, because of course he is, who is married with a son. They live in a big house, whatever. Trixie doesn't like him. I mean, it's clear to the reader that he's not a good person, but neither is Trixie, so it's just like, it's just annoying. So Trixie gives Jacob the spare bedroom as his writing space. He sells a story to a big travel magazine, which allows him to quit his job at the LA Weekly for at least a couple months just to focus on his book, which again, if you sold your story for enough money to not work comfortably for months, just move. What are you waiting for? You're clearly supporting yourself. It makes no sense. Just leave LA. At the end of this chapter, they've been living together for a number of months. Jacob says, I love you. Beatrice loves him back, but can't say it because she doesn't want to acknowledge him as the one, because she's scared of what bad things might happen if she does. Which, more foreshadowing about Jacob dying, whatever, we Ben knew. Fucking hitting us over the head with a hammer with that one. We know he's gonna die. All right, moving on. Chapter 13, she meets Jacob's mom, Johanna. The first thing she says to Trixie is to compliment her and tell her how nice her skin is. It's as if she's never seen the sun. But we find out more information about Jacob's deadbeat father. His name is Thomas Dorley, and he was a writer, successful in the 70s. Jacob has never read any of his books, of course. They go on a date at the Getty in the LA Museum. And, all right, I'm gonna go feed my cat. Okay, so Beatrice and Jacob go for a date at the Getty, and after this they're supposed to go to dinner, but Jacob gets weird, so they just go home and he shuts himself in his study to write for multiple hours. Trixie thinks that something's wrong. She goes in to talk to him, and he tells her that he saw Nina, his addict ex, at the Getty, and Trixie's upset because he didn't say anything while they were there. And then she thinks to herself, I hardly thought it was fair that she got to see me, but I didn't get to see her. The bitch. I rewound my memory fast and remembered that Jacob and I had stood in front of the fountain and kissed before he got in line for coffee. It was a full-on grand public display of affection with tongues and googly eyes and everything. I hope Nina had seen that. I hope she put that in her smack pipe and smoked it. Which, just reading this paragraph, it's just, Beatrice is so unlikable as a protagonist. Like, she has no empathy for anyone, really. Like, I haven't seen that yet, so it's like, it's just very, very upsetting to read this book and know that the author, like, wants you to root for her as a character, because there is something to be said for, like, an immoral protagonist, but if you want to make that workable, then there has to be some sort of redeeming quality, like a flawed protagonist, where, like, they're not, like, a good person, but there's likable qualities to them that still make you, like, root for them and want them to, like, succeed, or, like, make them a bad character on purpose. Like, you can have an unlikable main character, but it's just like, this is executed poorly because she is so unlikable, but you can tell that the author really wants you to root for her, and I just can't. Like, she just sucks, and it's like, I don't want to root for her while I'm reading about it. But anyway, Jacob is concerned for Nina because she was a close person to him for a long time. I still think that he should have communicated with Beatrice. Like, he has massive communication problems, and he should have said something earlier, especially because we find out that he has invited Nina over to their apartment tomorrow, but also, like, all right. So Trixie goes, oh, so you have a date with your ex-girlfriend tomorrow? And it's like, girl, no, he didn't say that. It's just Nina, someone he was close to for a long time, who's clearly going through a lot in life, and he wants to help her out, which, do I think he should have invited her to their apartment? Maybe not. Do I think that he should have communicated this to Beatrice earlier? Definitely. Do I think Beatrice's reaction is warranted? No. So, she slams the office door in his face and thinks to herself, I would rather be alone than ever be my mother. I will leave before I am left. My intuition told me I was out of control, but there was nothing I could do. So she storms out of the door. She thinks that she should just go downstairs and hook up with her ex-boyfriend, because Jacob is clearly going to hook up with Nina, and there's no other reason that they could be hanging out. Jacob asks her to stay. Beatrice goes, why do you care? Maybe you can invite Nina over while I'm gone. Jacob says, maybe I will. And Beatrice leaves and then gets upset that Jacob doesn't follow her. And, like, I don't know what to do with this scene, because they are just both so annoying. They're both wrong. Yeah. So she goes over to Pete and Sarah's. Pete is at their house with Jacob, so it's just Sarah. They talk about Nina. Beatrice says that she thought Nina was a lesbian. Sarah tells her that was just a phase. They get drunk together, have a heart-to-heart. Sarah opens up to Beatrice about how much she wants a kid, how many doctors she's been to, and she's just very sad about it. She doesn't mention Pete going to see doctors, so in my mind I was like, oh, like, is Pete being shady? Is this gonna come back later in the narrative? Like, is this gonna come full circle? Spoiler alert, it does not. I was overthinking. The plot to this book is very simple, and I gave it too much credit. But anyway, Pete comes home. We get some more gems from Pete. He goes, even though you're, to Beatrice, completely irrational, like all women are, Jacob loves you. He continues later to say, what do most guys want from a woman? I'll tell you what we want. We want a warm body to sleep next to, preferably one with a nice pair of tits, maybe someone who will cook for us and fuck us on a regular basis. Pretty simple, huh? Jacob's not like that. He's never been like that. He wants someone to obsess over, someone to possess his soul. So, it was at this point that I was really hoping that they were setting him up to be an antagonist, because what a bunch of misogynistic bullshit that just was. And also, this idea that Jacob is so special because he doesn't see women as objects and wants to fall in love. Like, I'm sorry, mate, but that's just like the bare minimum, and this book is treating it like that's like God's gift to women, that he's so special that he wants to actually love you and care about you, versus just like fuck you and get food. Like, it's just not, it's not romantic to me. It's just disappointing. Oh, and then Pete also says, if I was him, I'd kick your ass, running off and slamming doors and all that. Pete is just the worst. And this is Jacob's best friend. Like you can't tell me that the people you surround yourself with are not a reflection of you as a person. So I'm just like, the fact that this man is Jacob's best friend is not really saying anything good about Jacob, you know? Trixie returns home to her and Jacob's apartment. She intends to apologize for storming out, but Jacob is scowling at her, so they start arguing again, and Beatrice threatens to walk out again, and she actually opens the door, and Jacob storms over and slams the door shut, says, "Oh no, you don't. My back was against the wall. He straddled me with his outstretched arms. Move," I yelled. "No," he said, simply and calmly. "Let me go." I struggled to get away from him, but he was stronger than I was. I didn't have much of a chance. I was determined, nevertheless, to fight the good fight. "Get out of my way. You're not going anywhere. You can't control me. Looks like I can. Fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck off. Suck my dick." I bit him on the arm as hard as I could. So, that opens an escape route, and she dives towards the bedroom. I thought I'd make it there and be able to lock him out for the night, but he was quick. He tackled me just as I got through the door, and we fell, face down, onto the bed. In a frenzy, he flipped me over and held my arms flat. Before I knew it, his tongue was in my mouth, deep in my throat. So, then she thinks to herself that she is enjoying this, but I just want to bring to the reader's attention that he has had no indication that she's enjoying this. She was trying to leave the apartment and he physically stopped her. She tried running away and he tackled her and forcibly kissed her. Not great. I wanted him badly, but I resisted with all of my strength. Partly because I was still pissed at him, but more so because I could tell he liked it. The more I struggled, the hotter he got. Fucking bitch, he said, trying to pry my legs apart. Said, don't pretend you don't want it, he said. And, you know, she fights a little bit more. He calls her a whore, and that's when she stops fighting. But again, up until this point, he has had no clues from her that she wants this. Which I don't find romantic. I think that's a bit concerning. But of course, the reader knows she wants it. She wants it. So it's all good. They end up devouring each other like fucking was food and we hadn't eaten in months. And they finish, they share a kiss, and they go to bed without talking. And all is forgiven. The conflict just resolves because they had sex. Which is a theme in this book. Not that they have serious conflict, because, you know, why would you add that to a story? But they have surface level conflict that is resolved with sex. So, anyway, continuing on. They wake up in the morning, they apologize. Beatrice finally says, I love you, back to Jacob. Nina comes over. Beatrice leaves so they can talk. We're treated to a fun little scene where Beatrice goes to a cafe and the 18-year-old barista asks her to a party and like lightly flirts with her. Like, it's obviously, I think as a barista you shouldn't be flirting with your customers, but it was like, he's an 18-year-old and like he's just being stupid. Nothing like offensive, but she asks him to a party and she declines. And then she says, Bernard, the truth is, even though you think you're really cool, I'm pretty sure you couldn't lick a pussy to save your life. Which, like, why would you say that? Like, I know that it was like, ooh, this line's gonna be so girl power, but it's like, I just feel like that was awkward. I just feel like you could have just said no and moved on with your life. But instead she says that, and then still like sits down and hangs out in the coffee shop, which I feel like that would be wildly uncomfortable. But whatever, she sits down, she reads part of Jacob's dad's book. She thinks it's about how he regrets losing Jacob. So, yeah, fun. She goes and gets a haircut. She gets a pixie cut. Wonderful. And then she tells Jacob to read his father's book because she thinks it'll like enlighten their relationship or something. Chapter 17 starts off with a doozy. The first time my ass ever touched a public toilet seat was the day I made the reservations for Jacob's 30th birthday dinner. I'm very particular about where I set my ass, so to allow that kind of mishap was beyond comprehension. I've always squatted. You're telling me this girl has absolutely never touched a public toilet seat? Not even drunk, not even, I just, unrealistic. Anyway, so It's Jacob's birthday. Beatrice makes reservations at a nice restaurant. The restaurant calls her the day of and tells her they can no longer accommodate the reservation, and they offer that the party can either dine at an earlier or later time, and that she will give them a complimentary dinner for two the next time they go there. But Beatrice isn't happy with this, which honestly, I would be perfectly happy with that. Like, sometimes you can't be flexible, so it would be annoying. But the free dinner for two would be like nice, and you can still go just earlier or later. Beatrice doesn't like this though, and she tells the hostess to shove her dinner for two up her vagina. Again, rude, crass, inappropriate. It is not the hostess's fault. I'm sure the hostess was just doing what the manager told her to do. Like, Beatrice does not respect service workers. I'm just gonna say it. She doesn't. She does not. But Jacob's sad that Trixie's upset about the dinner fiasco, so he calls and pretends to be Keanu Reeves so that they can still go to dinner at this restaurant. Was that whole entire excerpt needed or relevant? No. Did it add anything to the story? No. Did I hate reading it? Yes. They're at Jacob's birthday dinner. The party is Trixie, Jacob, Sarah, Pete, Jacob's mom and her date, and Kat and her date Gopal. Pete orders for everyone and they're all fine with that. I would personally not be fine with that, but whatever, so fun. Pete drinks a lot, and at one point he barks at Sarah during dinner, and Trixie notes that she didn't like that. I thought this was them setting him up, like starting to set him up to be an antagonist. But no, they don't. They don't, unfortunately. He's just terrible. And I thought that, maybe this was gonna lead up to some sort of interesting conflict where, Beatrice gets closer to Sarah. She finds out, like, Pete's not treating Sarah very well, and she has conflict with Jacob about it because Jacob doesn't want to believe about his best friend, that he could be, like, a bad person or whatever, but no, this doesn't go anywhere. It's just included for no reason. But yes. So the big conflict of this chapter is that while going to the bathroom, Trixie runs into her father, who cheated on their mother and walked out on their mother like 9 years ago, and Trixie hasn't had a relationship with him since. But she runs into her father, who's with the woman that he left her mother for. But she, like, completely loses it. Like, disassociates completely. She says, apparently, I stared blank-faced at my father and walked back to our table, catatonic. And she just stops talking completely, like, dissociates, like, she's just going through it, but, like, I understand, like, it sucks. Like, I'm sorry that your father cheated on your mother, and, like, you're dealing with the ramifications of that in your relationships as an adult. But she is, like, not speaking to anyone, completely dissociated. Like, she is having a full-on, like, PTSD reaction. Like, I read this and I was like, it sounds like your father straight up abused you. Like, I'm sorry. It's a shitty situation, but the situation does not warrant this kind of response. The situation does not warrant this kind of response. It just seems like way too over the top. But yeah, she literally says she forgets her father's first name. He comes over to talk to them. She doesn't process any of it, but she does notice about his new wife that she has a wide ass, and from the front she looks small, but her backside was a different story. I couldn't wait to tell my mother. Tara was a yappy dog with a wide ass. So doesn't process anything about the interaction, but does make sure to criticize his new wife on her appearance. Which, you know, if she was involved in an extramarital affair, probably not like the best person. But if you're only going to criticize one thing about her, like, don't make it her physical appearance. You know? Like, what does that add to the character? Nothing. And it'd be one thing if Beatrice later in the novel acknowledged that she was unfair in judging women on their appearance or had any sort of character development on that front, but she doesn't. So the book never acknowledges that this is a toxic way to think about and evaluate women's worthiness, which I find disappointing. So apparently Trixie's father invites her and Jacob to Thanksgiving dinner. Trixie says, no way. Jacob says they should give him a chance. Trixie tells the reader that her father sends her a birthday card every year and says he misses her. Which, yeah, I mean, it sounds like he's trying. Like, in terms of the absent father hate, like, I understand a lot more Jacob's resentment. Because Trixie's father, like, yeah, he was a shitty husband, but he was consumed by his career, but otherwise he may not have been, like, the worst father in the world. And Trixie's just like, he's the pits, I hate him, like, absolutely not, blah, blah, blah. So we get to chapter 20, and it's Trixie's birthday. Jacob decides to take her on a surprise road trip. On this trip, Trixie decides to start a diary because she wants to be the 21st century's answer to Anais Nin. When I'm dead, I want strangers to read about all the awesome sex I had and wish they could be so lucky. That was just pretentious and annoying to read. But they go to San Francisco. Jacob books them a room at the Ritz-Carlton, which I thought this man was supposed to be poor. They have Thanksgiving with Jacob's Uncle Don. They discuss where they want to move in the South. And they have Uncle Don taking a photo of them holding a half-eaten duck carcass. So quirky. It's the first picture they have together, which has to be purposeful at that point because they've been together for 8 months. Also so quirky, good for them. Trixie takes it upon herself to buy Jacob another copy of his father's book, and the cashier at the bookstore tells Beatrice that Jacob's father comes in often because he lives close by. So Trixie gives Jacob the book to read, and while he's reading it, she goes and calls information from a payphone and requests an address and phone number for Jacob's dad. Why would she take this upon herself? I don't know. So, you know, they have some more sex, etc. But the next chapter, Beatrice asks Jacob to go stop by his father's house, and he says yes. They go to his house. They, surprise, surprise, meet his new wife and teenage son, which is, you know, a little cliche, but they don't really add anything to the narrative. that much, so anyway. But his dad pulls up as they're about to leave, and he takes Jacob and Beatrice out for drinks, clearly a raging alcoholic, and he's just an absolute piece of crap to both of them. Jacob gets up and leaves because he's being an asshole. Beatrice stays to talk a little bit more and gives him Jacob's address, which I feel like was not her decision to make. They go back to the hotel. Jacob is in a very shitty mood. So she gives him some space, goes and gets a tarot reading. She tells the reader that the tarot card reader is overweight, and she contemplated advising her to opt for a lower calorie snack while predicting futures, but I was afraid I'd offend her and she'd tell me something awful. Just more judging people on their appearances. We're not surprised, but we're just disappointed. So she tells her that she has a vision of impending doom, not to let her loved ones wander, and that every end promises a new beginning. Just more foreshadowing that Jacob's gonna die. We get it. So she goes back to the hotel. Jacob wants to go get a beer. They go to a bar. Jacob is obviously upset because so they're at the bar, and a guy that Beatrice knows, Omar, who she was roommates with his girlfriend her last year of college, steps up to the bar and they begin chatting. Apparently she was attracted to him and she thought he was attracted to her back when he was dating her roommate. So she used to walk around the apartment wearing black lace bras under thin white t-shirts just to give him a glimpse of what he was missing while he was dating her roommate. Like, she is not a girl's girl. We do not root for this girl. But anyway, he comes up to the bar, they start chatting. He asks Beatrice to dance, and she tries to get Jacob to come with them, and he says no, because he's in a terrible mood. So she decides to go dancing with Omar. A slow song comes on, and she lets Omar put his arms around her, and he whispers in her ear that he used to have a thing for her, and keeps pulling her closer and whispering to her, and she doesn't stop it until his hand is literally almost on her ass. And then she's like, oh, maybe I should stop this. Like, let me go look for my boyfriend. He's not at the bar, he left. She was like not throwing herself, but she was allowing another guy to advance upon her right in front of him. After she had him go meet his dad and it went terribly, like, I just don't understand why we're supposed to root for this girl. She's terrible. But she goes to get in the car to leave to look for Jacob. Omar tries to kiss her, and she briefly hesitates before she pushes him away, which, why are you hesitating at all? But she does have a brief moment of self-awareness where she goes, Jacob needed me and I'd let him down. I'd gone off and danced and flirted while he wallowed in misery. So at least I'll give her props for that. Like, she's a little self-aware that she fucked up. So she goes back to the hotel and decides to wait for Jacob there. He gets back, he's still upset with her. And like, you know, I'm on his side on this one. I'll just say it. But she They go to bed. She wakes up because she has a nightmare about him drowning. But then she purposely made a lot of noise around the room. I live by a rule that if I'm not sleeping, nobody's sleeping. Selfish. Jacob reveals that he went to the bar his dad frequents last night and they talked. Jacob asks if Trixie slept with the guy from the bar. She says no. They get in bed, they talk it out, and they have makeup sex because every conflict between these two ends in makeup sex. We flash forward. They've been together a little over a year. Jacob finishes his novel, Hallelujah, and we learn that Jacob's semen tastes like lemon meringue pie. Why did I want to know that? I did not. I would also like to point out that we are about halfway through the book and there has been almost nothing happen of consequence. Basically, Beatrice and Jacob meet and instantly fall in love. Jacob has a conversation with his father and discovers that he has a half-brother. Do they do anything with that? No. And Jacob finishes his book. That's it. That's all that happens in the first half of the book. There's been no other build-up to any major conflict other than the foreshadowing of Jacob drowning and, like, I guess the conflict of trying to leave LA and move to the South, but that kind of falls flat when you consider that they have self-imposed their staying in LA. Beatrice has plenty of money. Jacob is said to be poor, but he's selling stories for like notable amounts of money and paying for weekends at the Ritz-Carlton, and is generally shown to be a successful writer. So I don't understand why there's this self-imposed conflict of waiting for Jacob to finish his book. It just falls flat. So it just kind of seems like there's not much plot happening, and there's also not much character development happening. And as far as characterization, we don't really have much of that either. Basically, their relationship, they're very deeply in love. What they are shown to have in common is that they are so deep and have such a profound sense of the world, which, okay, and they both hate LA and hate their fathers. So, compelling characterization, to say the least. But he finishes his book. His agent says that she can negotiate a price in the mid 5-digit range. Yay, they're happy. Beatrice hangs out with Kat. She's considering dumping her Indian boyfriend because if I'm going to smell like cumin for the rest of my life, this relationship is doomed. So, 3 months go by, Jacob's not selling his book, they're impatient to leave LA, just leave. Trixie's family gets a portrait taken, and she sees her other brother, Cole, for the first time in 3 years. He is going to join a law firm in Montgomery, Alabama, working for a nonprofit. Good for him. But Beatrice is also equally impressed by the fact that he wears the same deodorant that Jacob uses, so he can't be that bad. Cool. We find out Sarah and Pete are expecting. Good for them. and we are treated to another Rochambeau scene, which this time Beatrice loses, which no surprise, because she's unable to play rock, paper, scissors. But we get another insulting description of Asian food, where Beatrice says, "I had to eat all but one of the leftovers, including that something that looked like a soggy almond on a bed of rice. It tasted like spoiled milk and was some kind of fish organ, only I'm not sure which one because no one would tell me. Whatever it was, it made me sick. I threw up as soon as we got home, and beige mucus dripped out of my nose." Why do we need that? Chapter 31. Trixie has made a new type of jewelry called bad mood rings and good mood rings, which are wildly successful, and she had to hire an assistant, and she's just doing so well in her career. But when she gets home, Jacob is gone, and she finds out that his dad has passed away. He wants to go to the memorial service, but his wife asked him not to come. So he tells Trixie that he's going to work the next day, but he lied. He actually goes to San Francisco and stands outside the funeral instead of going in. He calls her to pick him up from the airport because he's wasted, and she goes and picks him up. Again, inability to communicate. His dad died, so he gets some leeway, but just be like, I gotta peace out for a day or two. Jacob goes into a mad depression. He finds out that his dad left him the house that his wife and son currently live in. But his wife gives him $150,000 cash to sign the house over to her, and Jacob accepts, but asks that the check be made out to his mother. Good for him. He could have taken some of the money. They could have left LA. But, you know, it was nice. It was nice of him. But after this, he just completely falls off the rails. He's drinking in the mid-morning, sleeping it off in the afternoon, and disappears in the middle of the night and just goes driving around all night. So Jacob is in shambles. Trixie's career going phenomenally. She is set to attend this massive charity gala where they are auctioning off one of her pieces to a bunch of celebrities and rich people. And Trixie says, "To have so many obnoxious people appreciate my work felt like a small failure to me." Like, she's upset that her career is going well. That's just, it's annoying to read. She could have just said no, but it's for charity, but then she's still complaining about it. So Jacob's going because Kat threatened to fix Blanca up with another eligible bachelor at the event, and he got jealous, which obviously this is going to go terribly because he's a budding alcoholic and depressed, so it's not going to go well. But yeah, so they get to the event together. Jacob is looking on with a mix of repulsion and detachment, as if he were watching an appendectomy. And he's just generally being a jerk to people, and Beatrice calls him out on it. So he just starts giving her the silent treatment. Very mature. So we find out that the tiara that Beatrice designed for the event, she would have sold it for 20 grand, but someone bought it for 10 at the auction. Good for her. Career so successful. But Jacob disappears, and Trixie doesn't know where he is. And he was gone from the apartment when she got back from the party, and he didn't come home or communicate with her for like 5 days. He calls her up after 5 days and says he is in Needles, California. So she deletes the message and doesn't call him back, and honestly, good for her, because he's acting immature and annoying. He calls every day for the next week, but she doesn't answer and says she's beginning to hate him. He comes back after 15 days and tries to kiss her, and she pushes him away. She wishes that a sudden catastrophic earthquake would hit them so that her and Jacob could die together and be together forever. What the hell? So Jacob is like, oh, you're upset with me. He asks her what's wrong. Obviously, the fact that he disappeared for 15 days without telling her what was up was wrong. But she decides to break up with him, and she tells the reader that she wanted him to beg and say they would move away immediately, but he didn't, and that disappoints her. He says that she never understood him at all, and Beatrice decides to say that she doesn't love him anymore, which is not true. And so Jacob packs up a bag and leaves without saying goodbye. Sarah ends up telling Beatrice that Jacob is staying at her and Pete's house, and he starts to phone every day, but they end up finally, she doesn't give him the time of day, basically. She goes on a date with someone else. She hates it and misses Jacob. She starts working at Kat's store to distract herself, and Jacob shows up a little bit later and asks her to go out to eat. He takes her to a southern food restaurant and apologizes to her, but also calls her out for giving up on their relationship. And he tells her he sold the book and is leaving to move to Memphis in a month and wants her to come with him, and she says yes, and they have makeup sex, of course. So Jacob finally asks Trixie why she has not moved out of LA because she has money, and she goes, well, maybe I didn't think it was an option, but maybe I just didn't want to go by myself. And I'm glad they addressed it, but that was just very disappointing. So Jacob tells Trixie to call her dad. She says no. Jacob says he's going to tell her dad that they are leaving, and her dad calls her and asks to see her before she goes, and she accepts. She is surprised when they get to his house that he has some photos of her up around, and that he remembers a lot of things from when Beatrice was a child, very happy memories, and she's impressed with him that he remembers these things. And she realizes that, her mother wasn't solely a victim, and that her parents just weren't a good match for each other, and it's unfortunate the way her dad treated her mom, but maybe she can still have a good relationship with him. And it's oh my god, duh. Which, character development is good. I'm glad they finally had some character development in this, but it's just it's very annoying that that was her main thing to get over, and it was solved within one interaction. It just seems very empty. But they leave on a nice note. And then we get to Pete and Sarah's going away party for Beatrice and Jacob. We also learn that Jacob has not been drinking since he went on his little disappearing act, which good for him. Again, happy to have some character development. But Jacob gets a weird feeling. They decide to go to the beach because Jacob wants to create a moment. He wades in until the water's up to his knees, and then lays down and floats on his back, and a wave comes and breaks over him unexpectedly, and he disappears, doesn't come back up. He's obviously drowning. Beatrice freaks out, goes to a payphone and calls for help, goes back and tries to find Jacob. Honestly, this chapter 49, where Jacob dies, was written very well compared to the rest of the book. It seemed like she had like the panic and the denial and the fear. It felt semi-realistic, and there wasn't that pretentious drivel that's been like throughout the rest of the book. It was just very real in the moment emotions, and I thought that the author did an alright job depicting this hugely traumatic event. That all goes out the window the next chapter, but she goes back to Sarah and Pete's house, goes to sleep. Jacob's mom gets there the next day. The police call the next evening, say they've found his body, but they need someone to identify it, so Pete goes and identifies the body. Beatrice goes back to the house, and she sees all their stuff in boxes because they were getting ready to move. Again, this was actually a genuinely sad scene, but she falls asleep on the kitchen floor. So then we go to Jacob's funeral. We get the detail that Beatrice is wearing a ridiculously expensive Calvin Klein suit. I don't know why that's relevant, but apparently it is. While she's at the memorial service, Beatrice thinks to herself, it's just a part of life. The difference was everybody didn't lose someone like Jacob. I could have easily named 100 people the world would be better off without. The way I saw it, the permanent absence of Jacob Grace was a cruel, savage blow to the whole goddamn planet. Which everyone feels this way when they lose a loved one, so I understand it in that regard. But in terms of the reader's relationship to Jacob Grace, I feel like we hadn't really come to feel that way about him ourselves. I think that the only thing that may have earned him this from the reader's perspective was when he had his inheritance from his dad given to his mom instead. But other than that, he just seems like a very average indie soft boy. I feel like he would have gotten along with Cole Sprouse, if you know what I mean, if you've seen the whole Call Me Daddy podcast, whatever, like, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, Nina, his addict ex-girlfriend, shows up to the funeral service and offers Trixie her condolences. And, you know, she has a very normal reaction. She says, Nina didn't look sick, but I envied her anyway. Odds are she's going to die before I do. That means if there is life after death, she'll see Jacob again first. Do you think you can have sex in the hereafter? I said to Kat. I don't want Jacob and Nina to get back together in paradise. The end of the book, the conclusion, Beatrice decides she is still leaving LA as she and Jacob planned, which, thank God, because if I had to sit through a whole entire novel of her talking about how horrible LA is and how much she wants to leave, and in the end Jacob dies and she decided to stay, like that, it would be ridiculous. So thank God she's still leaving. But she decides to drive north instead of south, so she's not going the route that her and Jacob talked about. She goes and sits by a canyon in Utah and writes in her diary about Jacob and names her journal God-Shaped Hole and leaves out of Utah to an unknown destination, both to the reader and to her at that moment in time. And she ends the story by concluding that she will never get over or lessen her sorrow until she dies. Just such a positive note. So yeah, that was this book. Obviously, I hated it. Plot itself, not that bad. Beatrice and Jacob, insufferable to read about. I wish I had not had the displeasure of meeting them in literary form. No words for Pete, he's just the worst. And in conclusion, I hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I hated reading this book. Have a good one.